Well, I want to keep going with the Great Pyramid, and if you haven't seen previous episodes in this little series, the there's some beautiful maths in regards to the Great Pyramid. It's all called coincidence. The official Egyptologist is pretty piss poor, to be frank about it. However, amongst the, let's call them alternative researchers, and something that just keeps getting passed on and again, it's quite lovely, quite beautiful. However, it is not the fuller story. And so, for instance, in regards to pi and phi to begin with, and the typical description is 440 by 280 Egyptian royal cubits. That's true of the southern face, but that's based on two-dimensional thinking, and the Great Pyramid is not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. And by that, so if we go to, well, you could pull up other surveys, including modern ones done with the best modern equipment, but still basically they're reinforcing the survey data that come from J.H. Cole and his survey data again within splitting hairs of the Egyptian government survey, and that goes back sometime 1925. Still remains relevant because, well, it's the same size it was then as what it was before. And using this data and trying to be as rigorous as we can, I think that's the way to go in regards to this, because, well, that's what it is, not what we want it to be. We need to look at what it actually is, and this holds beautiful information, lovely information, and information that should not exist. And not only that, because of its, we're talking about measures and proportions, and as it is in regards to trying to do battle with the Zawi Hawass school of fluff and nonsense and corruption. And they just simply will not accept all these facts, because it will ruin careers, it will ruin reputations, and a lot of the people who have built reputations, official establishment Egyptologists, aren't worth anything, and that's why it's so important, because there are reputations, income, it's all based on this, and it's one of the reasons why it's so dangerous to them, and why they simply refuse to allow the Great Pyramid, and many other, Great Pyramid is not alone, many other ancient monuments, but it will bust open a wider story, pointing to the fact that the ancients were very, very advanced, and that global trade existed long before the official story will recognize. And again, it's all a big house of cards, the official ancient history, and through rigorous methods we can expose that, and again, just to remove any chance of coincidence, and just to do a quick review. So okay, so what I'm saying is, here's my hypothesis, is that the Great Pyramid in itself, and the small margins of error in the slight variations on each side, are actually pointing to creating a map of knowledge, a map of beautiful maths, which will lead, which it's worth considering for Hermetic schools, as above, so below, because you could rewrite that as to say, as what is on the inside is on the outside, and the Great Pyramid repeats these beautiful proportions, mathematical knowledge which didn't, officially did not exist for thousands of years after, and they've repeated it multiple times on the outside, and then they repeat it again on the inside, and it removes any chance of coincidence. And if you want to stick to coincidence, you got your head in the sand. It's the warcry of the fool. These things can be measured, they can be tested, and they're repeated inside and out, as above, so below, as on the inside, as on the outside. Now, in regards also, let no one ignorant of geometry enter my door. This goes back to the Pythagorean schools. Pythagorean knowledge emerged from ancient India and from Egypt. And, well, weights and measures, trade, geometry, astronomy, arithmetic, geometry, the quadrivium are at the core of this, because it requires, a little bit of academic investigation. Typically, I have to be honest, some more outlandish stories. Now, what I call outlandish may be true, but it's, if you make an extraordinary claim, you need extraordinary evidence. If you accuse someone of a crime, it's not up to them to prove they're innocent, it's up to you to prove that they're guilty. And this is one of the philosophical flaws in regards to so much which goes around this, is like, I can make an outrageous claim. Okay, I'll take back the word outrageous. I can make a quite bold claim and then say to the person, well, now you have to prove me wrong. No, that's not how it works. If you make a claim, the onus of proof is on you. I can't point at someone and say, he's a murderer, prove me wrong. That's just not the way that it works. And so let's look at the actual physical evidence of the Great Pyramid and the extraordinary symphony of coincidence, which is written into stone. It's a textbook in stone, and the official version of history simply will not even discuss it. What they do is they water it down. They'll pick 1 or 2 points out and then metabunk style poison the well. And well, let's look at it. And so each corner of a pyramid, is what I'm saying, is represents a piece of knowledge. So for instance here, the southwest corner, southeast corner represents proportion. The southwest and southern face represents pure measurement. The western and northwestern represents beautiful geometry, and the north and the northeastern represents beautiful astronomy and timekeeping, geodesic earth-based measures, which include not just like tape measure, but also measurements of time. And as a review, so pointed out earlier, so it will include some other ones as well. But for instance, from the southwest corner, looking at the Great Pyramid as three-dimensional object, not two-dimensional, we get beautiful proportion of pi, which is better than the ideal measures, which is still nice, but this is even more accurate. Now with that, we can also, the southwestern corner once again, including the maximum visible base and the maximum invisible height, and by that I mean the subterranean portion of it as well, because it extends below ground. We have a proportion of the golden number, phi squared. Phi squared equals phi plus 1. This is why phi is so beautiful. Sunflowers, galaxies, tornadoes, not tornadoes, hurricanes or cyclones as we say here, all are built around this golden number. It's one of the integral pieces of nature. It's undeniable, yet there are the establishments such as Devlin and Sautoy and these other guys will try and will ignore it, and they're not even trying to debunk it, they ignore it because it's a problem. And again, gatekeepers of F and C's, mate. So what we have is phi proportions and pi proportions on the southeast corner. The southwest corner, we have multiple references to pi in measurement, and we have, as a system of measurement, we also have, where is it? That's that one there. Okay, so we also have phi as a measurement once more. What's on the outside is repeated on the inside, but what I haven't shown in this little series is that also the angle of the Great Pyramid itself, again using trig and some really important, fundamental, essential math, is that we also have the golden ratio appearing once more, and this case being phi minus 1, which is equal to 1 over phi. It's a beautiful number, most beautiful number there is. All numbers are lovely, but phi is royalty amongst these types of things. So the angle, the proportion, and the measurements are all pointing to the golden section. And so, but that's on the outside, and that might be, okay, of course there's one that I haven't shown, and let's just get that out of the way. And so what we also have is phi as a proportion on the eastern side. There we have the golden number itself. I'll get this one out of the way. Okay, so there we see on the eastern side the apophthegm over the base apophthegm, and it's also worth considering that the maximum visible surface area of the Great Pyramid is in a phi relationship to the base area of the Great Pyramid. Area represents 2 dimensions, we have 1 dimension, and we'll also see 3-dimensional knowledge. First, second, and third dimension. We need to get away from this 2-dimensional thinking. It's you will not be able to see the greater picture while we stay focused on that. And also, while we stay focused on the ideal measures, we're going to miss so much more. Now, in regard, so, okay, we've already shown, well, there's another reference now, of course, phi squared, the square root of phi, which we'll get into astronomy as well, because that's also points us to the Earth and Moon proportions, and that is not all, because we'll get more into that now. Where's the... And what we also have is the Great Pyramid being a representation of the Earth. It's in perfect proportions to the size of the Earth. The Earth is spheroid. It's a little bit flat on the top compared to the equator, and the Great Pyramid encodes that as well. That all links to the Egyptian royal cubit, the meter, and the second. And so the rotate. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. What we have is phi and pi, and we have that on the outside. Now, according to official history, it's just unexcusable to say that this math knowledge existed at the time, and again, that's just bunk. So, quite shocking bunk. Now let's remove these ones. So we have phi and pi on the outside, the angle of the Great Pyramid. So these are outside, or the angle of is technically internal, but so just let's say this was all coincidence. This is just, they just so happen to choose this angle, these proportions, these measurements. That's just all coincidence. That's on the outside, as above, so below. What's on the inside is what's on the outside. And to begin with, the upper chamber, I'm not going to call it the king's chamber, because I don't, many other people find that very big issues with that. But so the king's chamber, upper chamber, whatever you want to call it. The sarcophagus itself details the Delian problem, and I'll make that a little bit more clearer. So not only is the perimeter of the king's chamber, or upper chamber, a representation of pi, again in meters, pi times 10 meters being the perimeter. This concept of the maximum visible, as what we can see, well, because of the sides there, so the maximum visible perimeter. So if you're standing there, you stand against the smallest wall, the most you can see is 3 walls, and that in itself will again point us to the golden number. Again, phi squared times 10 meters, and this is all related to the Egyptian royal cubit, which is related to the second, and it's just, this is just not acknowledged, even though it's a fact in physics. You can make a pendulum for yourself. It's all there. It's the second is being based on the meter. The meter, despite what Metabunk and these types of people say, was not to do with the French doing the survey of the Earth and dividing the Earth up into units. The meter and the second existed centuries before that. That's written down. It's the records are quite there. We also get the 3, 4, 5 triangle, which again was meant to be, again, official history will say it's got to do with Pythagoras and the Greeks, which come thousands of years later. Well, again, it's all in there, it's repeated, and to call this a coincidence. The Delian problem, again, was another thing which it's attributed to the Greeks solving it. Well, here it is, it's written there, it's written in fucking stone. You can put your head in the sand ostrich style, but there it is now. It's also worth noting that the upper chamber itself is aligned to the 4 cardinal points of the compass, just like the pyramid is itself. It still remains constructed to a degree of accuracy which modern skyscrapers cannot achieve. Only the most precisely built buildings even come close to achieving this level of accuracy. We have the Delian problem, 3, 4, 5 triangle, pi and phi, repeated on the outside, and what's on the inside is on the outside. This is to remove any chance of coincidence. They're passing on information here, and of course this is just one piece of it. It still gets a lot more. I just need to pause this for a moment. Okay, so references, what's repeated on the outside is again repeated on the inside in different forms, just to reinforce the fact that this is not a coincidence, despite what the official establishment will tell you, because either they're somewhere between incompetent or corrupt. Either way, it doesn't matter. They are just resistant to truth, resistant to the fact that in the infinite sea of numbers, in the infinite sea of random possibilities, that these keep coming back to reinforce each other, is just absolute confirmation that there is something much deeper, much more important than what's going on now. Another reference to, of course, to pi is that so not just the King's Chamber, but we also have the Grand Gallery multiplied by pi gives us the height of the pyramid. Again, this would be called coincidence, dismissed, irrelevant, yet that is just criminally incompetent. I don't know what the word to use is to describe this. It's somewhere between the most fundamentalist dogma that you can get and outright denial of measurable, tangible, testable facts now. So that's just to repeat some of those things. That's what's going on in regards to the Great Pyramid. And here's another now there's a lot to do with astronomy as well. So some of the points, and not by no means all of them, just some of the points, is that this proportion will also bring us to the scale of the Earth in regards to the Moon. So we have Earth and Moon coincidentally being referenced there, which will itself connect to these proportions, and because there are the slight variations, but so 13, this is based on the ideal proportions. However, if we include the exact measurements, which is bringing us so close to phi, square root of phi, we're also getting a description. As an example, you can see here how the geometry which emerges from the pyramid also conveys this information of the square and the circle, but also the proportion of the size of the Earth in regards to the Moon, and that's at this essentially 27.3%, which in itself is loaded throughout the pyramid, throughout ancient sites all across the world. It's one of these fundamentals, and it's just written in stone, it's written in ancient weights and measures. It's just an extraordinary thing, but again, just not known or examined by the establishment, and yet it's measurable, it's testable, it's weighable. And because there are the slight variations, but so 13, this is based on the ideal proportions. However, if we include the exact measurements, which is bringing us so close to phi, square root of phi, we're also getting a description of the Earth and the Moon in regards to one another. Now, that might be dismissed, and so I'll bring up back this view. Okay, before I forget, there are so many astronomical references in the Great Pyramid itself, and so see there, I've just turned off and on the shadow, because the Great Pyramid is an 8-sided object. It's not a 4-sided pyramid. Again, the official establishment will say that the 8 sides occurred because of the settling of the stone, and it just happened to settle at 90 degrees from one another. So again, this official explanation is just like cringeworthy, ridiculously bad, terribly bad, and frankly they should be ashamed of themselves to even mention it. And so if I bring, where's my okay, so 8-sided pyramid on the equinox, not just any day, but on the equinox, what we get is a shadow cast. It was built with such precision as to include this information. Again, as above, so below. Hermetic knowledge, Pythagorean knowledge, this is key to all of this. It's the eternal language, the universal language, cannot be lost in translation. Symbols, words can have different meanings to different people. You can basically choose what you want. However, number is as solid, more solid than stone, and it's universally true and will always remain so. And so what we have is there one of the astronomical connections. Now, also worth noting that the shafts on the Great Pyramid. Okay, before we go now, in regards to dimension, the dimensions of, as in first, second, third dimensions, looking at it in 2-dimensionally, you're only going to get part of the knowledge that's encoded. We need to look at it in first, second, and third. So from the northwest corner being the geometric corner, we have the circle inside of the square. We also have the sphere inside the cube, second and third dimension. And that ratio of a sphere inside a cube is, well, exactly the same as the ratio of the Egyptian royal cubit in regards to the meter. So this is a one-dimensional aspect to it. We have the two-dimensional aspect and the three-dimensional aspect. We have to look in higher dimensions, and this will actually point us to something much more profound than the first, second, and third dimension, but that's got to do with conversions and ancient measure systems. So it's just a fucking symphony of coincidence, and again, the dogma of the establishment in regards to these things is just if you examine it in a true way and forget all the assumptions and the dogma, something beautiful emerges from this. They're passing something on to us, and this is not just the Great Pyramid. This is on so many ancient temples across the world, from the stone circles in the UK over to the stone circles in Japan, everywhere in between, and also in the Mesoamerican culture, Mayans, Aztecs, etc. It's all there. It's all repeated. To rely on coincidence is a fundamentalist religion, and it's just stupid. Now, I mentioned, okay, so we have the proportions of the Earth and the Moon and how they interrelate with one another. They'll actually point us to some 273. If you want to mind fuck, get into 273. That's especially 27.3, because it's one of, again, the fundamentals in Hermetic architecture, such as in Washington, Canberra, Brasilia, Astana, Paris, London, ancient India, all across Asia, all across North Africa, the Middle East, and again the stone circles in the UK. All these ancient objects all have it in there, and it just, if it was not on purpose, then it would be random, but it's not random because it's everywhere and it's always. Now, in regards to, so we have each side, each corner of a pyramid is pointing us to another set of knowledge, phi and pi, measurement, which will bring us, of course, to phi and pi, but the meter of a royal cubit, and the second, even the foot. One Egyptian royal cubit is E minus 1 feet. Again, should not happen, but there it is. The geometry of the northwest corner, as we move towards the north, we also get to the Earth and the Moon proportion circling the square, and what we have in the northwest corner, as I've illustrated as a clock, because for 1 second, ancient Egyptian sundials, they divided the day into 12 hours. This is not some modern creation. It exists, goes back throughout time. The history of the second and the meter, once again, if you go to your standard metabunk type sources, it's just cringeworthy, bad, wrong, and just because it's like under the debunking in inverted commas, it's assumed, oh well, therefore it's sciencey, but it's not. There is dogmatic and agenda driven as the Roman Catholic Church during the Inquisition, and again, shameful behaviour on behalf of people like Mick West. So if we Great Pyramid, each of the angles, the northwest corner is pointing us not just to time, as in time and the second and the pendulum, but what we have is that the northwest corner, and if we stand at the corner, we look at it, what we get is the proportions of the Earth. Well, it's a scale model of the Earth, but you need to include the socle and the sockets. They give us that added dimension to it, and that's one of the purposes. What is it in there? Because, again, dimensionality, you need to look at it not just on a 2D plot and not just on the simplest of things. You need to incorporate the structures which are part of a Great Pyramid themselves, and that points us to the proportion of the Earth. So standing at the northwestern corner, by pure coincidence, sheer luck, got nothing to see here. What we see, the northwest corner, maximum visible base there, including the sockets, we get the rotation speed of the Earth. Unlike much of the history out there in regards to the meter, it was not created in 1791. It actually existed much further back to that. It was used to define a second. A 1 meter long pendulum comes from a 1 second pendulum, and well, traditionally, it's described using a 30-degree arc, and a 30-degree arc of 1 meter radius is 1 Egyptian royal cubit, or pi over 6 meters. It's also pi over 6 radian. So 1 Egyptian royal cubit equals 1 meter equals 1 second, or 86,400 seconds per day. And using this method, you get the description of time, the royal cubit as defined by the Great Pyramid, and also this 86,400 seconds per day, but also the ratio of the Great Pyramid to the whole of the Earth, not one hemisphere, but the whole of the Earth, 86,400. Again, testable, measurable. It's the basis of our modern time units. What we see, the northwest corner, maximum visible base there, including the sockets, we get the rotation speed of the Earth. The pyramid is fucking telling you the speed of the Earth rotating per second. Therefore, times by the seconds per day as defined by a pendulum, Royal Egyptian cubit, the meter in a second. It's all fucking linked. And what do we get? We get the equatorial circumference of the Earth equal to, or within 99.999% of the best modern description using satellites. And even those, if you do a first page Google search, get the equatorial circumference of the Earth, it's going to give you not the actual measurement, but an average based on a series of measurements, not a single one, because sometimes the ocean is, here you can see the ocean is on the edge. Sometimes if you waited a short time later, mountains would be on the edge of the Earth. So the actual which will bring us to the diameter, but also incorporates the circumference, because it's not a pure sphere. There is oceans, there's mountains, there's tides. It's changing all the time. There has to be an elasticity in regards to these things. It's a fundamental of measurement. So first page Google search and try and, well, you don't understand measurement. If you wanna come at me with that, well, good on you. You don't know what you're talking about. But of course, if we multiply the height of the pyramid, including the socle, which is the paving stones underneath, multiply that again by 86,400, we get the polar diameter of the Earth. Now I'll bring up, now the standard one doing the rounds is, and again, like I don't want to poo-poo it too much, because that was sort of what brought me to this understanding of it, but it is inelegant and incorrect, and this is what, and by that I mean what's usually defined as the 86,400 divided by 2 brings us 43,200. Now that's cool, but that's just, the Earth is not a half sphere, it's an entire sphere. And even the location of Heliopolis and the Great Pyramid, how they relate to each other, points us to 86,400, 43,200 again. Just like looking at the Great Pyramid as a two-dimensional piece of paper, it is only a half measure. We need to go further. We need to be as rigorous, and this all connects much more elegant. Use the pendulum, the Egyptian royal cubit, and the second. And now, what we also, well, there's a bunch of cool other stuff. Now, in regards to the shafts, now I'm going to the audio will change, because the next section I'm going to use, a different program anyway, but here, so this is just some of the connections. Now we have phi, pi, what's on the inside is on the outside, geometry, astronomy, the Earth, the moon, well, the equinox, so it brings in the sun as well, Earth, sun and moon, hermetic fundamentals, they're all there to be measured, tested, as apart from the accepted version of his story, like even that it was Caffrey. Well, what's that? That's based on a piece of graffiti up in Campbell's chamber, which is highly disputable, and again, it's just gets passed on, rusted on, accepted as truth. When you actually examine what the evidence is behind it, it's piss poor weak, and yet this testable, measurable, examination of using the best measures that we can. What do we, this somehow is considered kooky, outlandish, fringe, yet the Zawi Hawass version of events is somehow acceptable. I think not. It really is. It's, again, you just strip, where does the evidence come from? Where does the claims come from in regards to the Great Pyramid? It's based on very, very highly disputable evidence, and the amount of evidence is very, very poor, very low. There's very little of it in regards to that, and it just gets passed on as fact, because tell a lie long enough, repeat it long enough, it becomes the truth. Okay, so I'll move to the next section, but before I do, so if we remove some of these, just so we can get a view of the inside. And by that, because I mean the shafts of the Great Pyramid are also pointing to something very, very profound. Just get some more of these out of the way. Bear with me a moment. Where are we? There we go. Okay, so we can see the internal structures without being blocked. So there we have. So what we have, this shaft pointing out here from the upper chamber and from the lower chamber track the pole stars. They literally track the movement of, which is a reference to precession, the great year. It's pointing us to the movement of the North Star, because the North Star we have now was not where true north was all that time. Now let me move those ones. As where this shaft, which comes off the upper chamber, and this shaft as well, points to Orion's belt and to Sirius. So Alnitak in Orion's belt, the male aspect, and we also have pointing it to Sirius, and I'll bring up that animation next. So here we go. So just as an example of the shafts, and so there we see the shafts pointing off to the north and how they trace the movement of the pole stars as they were in older times. Now the North Star is, well, literally it traces the movement there of how they were, and another set of extraordinary coincidences, while the shafts which point off from the southern side point us towards Sirius and Alnitak in Orion's belt, especially Sirius in regards to legend, tradition, going back across many ancient civilizations. It's an essential in navigation, therefore it's an essential in trade, and once again this is all just coincidence, got nothing to do with it. Go away. 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9.